Hey everyone, and welcome back. I think speaking English fluently is well, it feel like a distant dream for a lot of people learning English,
Yeah.
but it's really more achievable than you think, and that's what we're going to be diving into today.
That's right. We're going to be looking at this idea of talk first, think later.
It sounds kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
We always hear, think before you speak, but when it comes to learning a new language, sometimes overthinking can really hold you back.
Yeah, it can. It's like, have you ever tried to ride a bike and you're like thinking about every single motion you're making?
Right.
You just end up like stiff and you fall over.
Yeah, totally.
And speaking fluently, it's really about developing that natural flow.
Yeah.
And that comes with practice, not over analyzing.
Okay, so how does this talk first, think later approach actually work?
Well, let's think about how children learn to speak.
Oh,
They don't worry about grammar rules or having a perfect accent. They just start talking. They make mistakes and they learn from those mistakes, and it's incredibly powerful.
so you're saying that making mistakes is actually a good thing when you're learning English?
It's essential.
Really?
Yeah, it gives feedback to your brain.
Okay.
Like every time we stumble over a word or a phrase, our brains are getting a signal that something needs adjusting. It's like a built-in learning mechanism.
So instead of like cringing every time we make a mistake, we should be like, yes,
Exactly.
brain is working.
Yeah, the more we speak, the more our brains get used to like forming sentences in English.
Got it.
And over time, this leads to greater fluency and
So
confidence.
it's about rewiring our brains to think and speak in English more naturally.
Exactly. And the key to that rewiring is consistent practice.
Okay.
The more we use English, the stronger those neural pathways become.
So it's like working out a muscle.
That's a great
The
analogy.
more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. And just like with exercise, consistency is key. Even just short bursts of speaking practice throughout the day, it can make a big difference.
So we really need to find ways to incorporate speaking into our daily routines, even if we don't have someone to practice with.
Absolutely. And there's lots of ways to do that, which we'll get into later.
Right.
But first, I think it's important to talk about like one of the biggest fears that language learners face,
Oh, yeah.
which is sounding silly or being judged.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, that feeling of hesitation, like everyone's listening and waiting for me to mess up.
Yeah, it's totally normal
Yeah.
to feel that way.
Right.
But just remember, most people are a lot more forgiving than we give them credit for, especially when they know you're learning a new language.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I think people are more impressed that you're making the effort
Right.
than they are, like just waiting for you to make a mistake.
Exactly. And think about it this way. Every native speaker was once in your shoes.
That's true.
They all went through the process of learning to speak their language.
Yeah. We were all babies once.
Exactly. We're all in the same boat, just at different stages of the journey.
I like that.
And the most important thing is to just keep moving forward,
Yeah.
even if it feels a little uncomfortable at times.
So how do we kind of overcome those feelings of self-doubt and start speaking with more confidence?
Well, one thing that I found really helpful is shifting your focus from perfection to progress.
Okay.
So instead of worrying about making mistakes, celebrate every small victory,
Yeah.
every word that you pronounce correctly,
Huh.
every sentence you construct, every conversation you have is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's about acknowledging our growth and celebrating those milestones, no matter how small they may seem.
Exactly. And as we start to recognize our progress, we naturally become more confident.
So it's a positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
The more we speak, the more we improve and the more confident we become.
Precisely. And with that increased confidence, you're more willing to take risks and try new things and push yourself further.
That makes sense. So we've talked about the importance of embracing mistakes and focusing on progress.
Yes.
But what are some practical strategies that our listeners can use to start incorporating talk first, think later into their daily lives?
Well, one simple but really effective technique is to just narrate your day in English.
Okay.
So as you go about your day, you just describe what you're doing, what you're seeing, what you're thinking.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be complex or grammatically perfect. Just get those words flowing.
So it's like creating a running commentary in your head
Yeah,
using English.
exactly. And as you practice this, you'll find that your brain starts to automatically think in English more and more.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So it's about training our brains to switch from translating to thinking directly in English.
exactly. And another helpful tip is to focus on using simple words and phrases at first.
Okay.
So don't get bogged down trying to use complex vocabulary or grammatical structures.
So it's better to communicate clearly with simple language
Yeah,
than to struggle to express ourselves with advanced vocabulary that we might not even be comfortable with.
exactly. And as you gain more confidence and fluency, you can gradually, expand your vocabulary and your sentence structures.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, just keep it simple and focus on getting your ideas across.
That makes sense. And what about those filler words that we all use, like and
Yeah.
Should we try to avoid those or?
Not at all. In fact, those filler words can actually make you sound more natural and fluent.
Really?
Yeah, native speakers use them all the time,
Okay.
and they serve a purpose. They give us a moment to, gather our thoughts
Right.
without interrupting the flow of the conversation.
So instead of viewing them as a sign of hesitation,
Uh-huh.
we can embrace them as a natural part of spoken language.
Exactly. And here's another tip that might sound a little silly.
Okay.
Talk to yourself out loud.
I'll admit I do that sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm practicing for a presentation or trying to work through a problem, I'll kind of talk to myself.
It's a great way to do it. Yeah.
It might feel strange at first,
Yeah.
but it's a fantastic way to get comfortable with the sound of your own voice in English.
Right. And there's no judgment there.
Exactly.
It's just you.
You're giving yourself that private stage to practice.
Yeah.
And if you want to take it a step further, you can record yourself speaking and then listen back
Oh, that's a good idea.
and identify areas where you might be hesitating or stumbling over words.
It's like having our own personal language coach.
Yeah.
Giving us feedback.
Uh-huh.
But what about like those deeper fears and doubts that many language learners face, like the fear of sounding silly, the feeling of not being good enough, or the worry that they'll never really truly be fluent?
Yeah.
How do we address those?
Those are incredibly common feelings, and it's really important to acknowledge them, but we also need to challenge those negative thoughts
Okay.
and replace them with more positive and empowering beliefs.
Right.
Remember, everyone who speaks a second language has been through this process.
Yeah, it's true.
They've all faced challenges.
Yeah. And made mistakes along the way, but they persevered and they achieved fluency, and so can you.
So it's about shifting our mindset from fear and doubt to belief and possibility.
Exactly. Believe in yourself, trust the process, and keep moving forward.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from embracing mistakes to focusing on progress to practical tips for incorporating talk first, think later into our lives.
We have.
Yeah. And before we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on this approach.
Yeah.
What's like the most important takeaway you want listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to remember that fluency isn't about perfection.
Okay.
It's about communication.
Yeah.
It's about being able to express yourself confidently and effectively, even if it's not always grammatically perfect.
So it's about letting go of that need to be perfect and embracing the journey of learning and growth.
Exactly. And remember, every time you speak English, you're taking a step closer to fluency.
I love that. So our challenge to listeners today is to embrace this talk first, think later approach.
Yes.
Find opportunities to speak English, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're just proof that you're learning and growing.
So go out there, speak English, and enjoy the journey.
The world is waiting to hear your voice.
But before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on something else that can really hold people back from speaking English more fluently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this idea that you need to have like this big vocabulary, these fancy words in order to be considered fluent.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's more important to be able to communicate your ideas clearly and effectively.
Right.
And that can be done with simple language.
Yeah.
You don't need to know all of the, obscure words and, complex grammatical structures.
Right. It's more about getting your point across.
Exactly. And as you practice speaking and listening to English, you'll naturally start to pick up new vocabulary.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you can start to incorporate those words into your own speech.
So don't be afraid to start simple
Yeah, just start talking.
and let those more complex words come later.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a great deep dive. I feel like I've learned a lot today about how to approach speaking English more fluently.
Me too.
And I hope our listeners have too.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, let's just reiterate that main point that talk first, think later, approach.
Yes.
Embrace those mistakes.
Don't be afraid to make them.
And just get out there and start speaking.
The world is waiting to hear your voice.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time.